The Pac-12 had its first ever media day event thing, and there's something they just have to accomplish right now.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. Getting you ready for the season. We've always got you covered. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Colorado is almost a touchdown dog to Nebraska, and Notre Dame is a playoff favorite. We're exploring those topics later on today's show. But yesterday was the Pac-12's first ever media day as the Pac-2, at least temporarily. And the information for those who did not attend, which I did not, is going to become available at a later date, possibly Thursday, is what Nick Daschel had reported, and he was down there in Las Vegas. And I was thinking about what they need to accomplish right now in order to reach a point where they can build a sustainable, at least for a period of time, expansion-driven conference, because they have to get to 8 teams by the 2026 football season. Now, reports have also come out, and the Mountain West had their media rights days, and Mountain West Commissioner Gloria Nevarez said that they are looking at, solidifying the 2025 scheduling arrangement, which they could go back on. I don't think that they would. But Oregon State and Washington State have to thread the needle right now because they need that Mountain West scheduling alliance for the 2025 season. They don't have enough options to play high caliber football. They couldn't fill a schedule that quickly for that many games. You can fill a couple games on short notice, but 7? That's pretty challenging. So they have to keep that while simultaneously projecting an image of a conference that is capable of being something that is worth joining. That's a tough needle to thread. Like the messaging that comes out publicly from anything that Teresa Gould, the commissioner, says, or anything that Scott Barnes says, or whoever the new president ends up being one day at Washington State, or their new athletic director who just took over after Pat Chun went over to Washington. Like they are in a precarious spot from a PR standpoint because you have to simultaneously project this is a conference where you should want to be, where perhaps more than just Mountain West schools would be interested in joining. You also cannot anger the Mountain West and threaten their existence or make them feel like you're bad actors in this space, which you could be and you might have to be. But you can't do that because then the 2025 scheduling arrangement, which you have to have, would it go up in smoke? That might be a big move because on the whole, if you're the Mountain West, I still think it is in your best interests, regardless of what Oregon State and Washington State's plans are for 2026 and beyond, to have that scheduling alliance because those two schools bring a level of cachet and respect to your conference and to the schedules that your teams are putting together to try to make the college football playoff as the highest ranked group of 5 champion, which Oregon State and Washington State can't do for the next 2 years. But after that, it's something that could be in the fold depending on what they do. But playoff access is paramount. I'm going to talk about the group of 5 and the playoff more on tomorrow's show, but playoff access is the key selling point that the Pac-12 has to be able to sell to other schools. That if you come here, you have a better chance of making the playoff than your current situation. Now, for Mountain West schools, that pitch is a much easier sell because that media rights contract they currently have is paying about $4 to $5 million. And the allure of making a move to a new league is historically a lot more appealing to any school in any conference than just standing pat where you are. So when the Mountain West media rights deal expires after the 2025 college football season and going into 2026 will have to be something else, whether it's the Mountain West deal or Fox and CBS decide they want the Pac-12 and not the Mountain West, how many Mountain West schools wind up in the Pac-12. We don't really know. But what we do know is Oregon State and Washington State have to try and make that move without crossing the proverbial line of, yeah, we're going to come in here and kind of tank your conference like what others have done to us. Now, I've seen questions get posed before about, is it hypocritical for Oregon State and Washington State? Like John Canzano was asking in his mailbag recently, for people to discuss whether or not it is hypocritical for Oregon State and Washington State to act in a potentially nefarious way towards the Mountain West that could result in its demise or serious reduction in schools and therefore value and presence in college football. Yeah, it would be. So, what other option do you have? Like, it might feel nasty. It might feel wrong to say, yeah, no, we want to have a scheduling alliance here in 2025. Then we're going to move to kind of tank your league the next year. But it doesn't feel great. Guess what? Adapt or die. Those are your options. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Well, so far, Oregon State and Washington State are on the precipice of dying. So they better start winning or worse options are going to follow. So I think that's a really, really difficult spot, and I'm more than a little fascinated to see what sort of statements were made, what sort of image they project, and how they navigate this landscape in the coming months, frankly, for the next 12 months, because this is going to be an ongoing ordeal. And I think the conversations for finding out what teams are going to be the best fits into a new look Pac-12 and whether they can get anybody from the American to jump ship, because financially, the American Athletic Conference has a more lucrative TV deal than does the Mountain West currently. That doesn't mean that they aren't similarly valued conferences. It's just the timelines of when everything's been negotiated. But American teams earn somewhere in the $7 to $8 million range. Last week, I had on retired Fox Sports president Bob Thompson, who said a rebuilt Pac-12 probably has a media rights valuation per school of $8.5 to $10 million. Let's say that number came down to $9 million per school. If an American Athletic Conference school, which might be in Texas, take UTSA, for instance, or North Texas, somebody along those lines, if one of those schools is looking at the prospect of going from $8 million to $9 million, but lengthening their travel, and they have to pay the exit fee, is that going to be worth it? Not sure. The selling point for the Pac-12 at that point becomes playoff access, and that has to be their principal focus as they go forward in what the realignment landscape is likely to look like and how it probably shakes out, whether I want it to or not. I will talk more tomorrow about what I would prefer college football look like from an FCS, Group of Five, and Power Conference landscape standpoint, but that'll be for tomorrow. So, for the next segment on today's show, did you drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments as always? I don't have to tell you because you do it anyway, but I like the engagement. It's fun. Colorado is a 6.5 point dog to a team they beat by 20 plus points last year. What should we make of that? We'll talk about that next. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I hope that's plainly obvious. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. I really don't. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets literally anytime I'm in the mood. Anything you could possibly want to wager upon for college football, something I've said you agree with, something I've said you disagree with, you can bet for it, against it, whatever you are looking for. Win totals, national title odds, conference championship odds, individual games can all be wagered upon over at FanDuel. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Colorado beat Nebraska handily last year, so it only makes sense after they've improved this offseason that they're 6.5 point underdogs week 2 on the road at Nebraska. That is Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs joining me here on the show. Kevin, what do you make of that line? That's almost a touchdown dog to a team you beat by multiple possessions last year where Colorado was clearly the better team. What do you make of that?
I think it's a little bit of home cooking. Obviously, Nebraska's at home, big difference. I think Nebraska, I don't want to project, but I do think they have one of the best home crowds in college football. Haven't
Very
been to all
good.
the home crowds, but I've heard it's very big, very wonderful, and so I imagine that that's a factor. I also think that Nebraska improved as well. Even though Colorado beat them last year, they did finish, I would say, better down the stretch than Colorado did. Not that it's saying much, being that Colorado won one game after September, but it was an interesting line to say the least. I do think that's a lot of belief in a freshman quarterback, Dylan Raiola, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I do think Colorado's a lot better though, so it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think the home factor for Nebraska is certainly playing a part, but typically home field is worth about 3 to 4 points or so. So if you figure 3.5, if this were a neutral site, it'd be Nebraska by 3, and it'd be essentially a pick 'em if it were in Boulder. I think Nebraska has improved having Dylan Raiola at quarterback, because what they had at quarterback last year cannot possibly be any worse. They did not have a 500-yard receiver. They threw for under 150 yards a game. Not ran. No, they threw for under 150 yards a game. So their quarterback play has to be better. And Raiola looked good in the spring game. Like, it's going to be improved. I don't think he's going to come in and set the world on fire, because I don't expect that of any true freshman. But that's why I expect Nebraska to be better. The reason this line still surprises me, Kevin, is because Colorado's improvement is not specific this offseason to one position. They have improved their offensive line. They have improved their defensive line. Those were massive weaknesses. And the quarterback was a big weakness for Nebraska. But that's why this line was so surprising to me, to say, look, if you want to favor Nebraska at home, okay, that shouldn't be more than a field goal, maybe even with a hook. 6.5 feels like you have a lot of belief in Matt Rule and just no belief in Deion Sanders in the bus.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you talk about they improved the offensive line, right? To add on to that point, Nebraska got to Shador 7 times last year. They sacked him 7 times, which the only other time that happened during the season was against Oregon, and they lost 42-6. And then it happened against UCLA, and they lost 28-16. So Nebraska was somehow the one team that sacked them 7 times and still didn't win, and it wasn't even close, right? So I think the trenches aspect is a really big deal. I also think there's that second-year Matt Rule factor that you kind of hinted at, where we know what Matt Rule is once he sort of establishes himself and gets his guys in the program, right? We saw it at Baylor. We saw it at Temple, whatever it is, wherever he's been, except for the NFL, obviously. But he is someone who kind of ingrains his culture. It may take a year, but then by year 2, that team is going to be a lot better. And I think by getting a 5-star quarterback, like you mentioned earlier, I think that helps expedite the process a little bit. So, yeah, I think there's more proof in Matt Rule succeeding in year 2 than there is season 2 or year 2 is than Deion Sanders. Obviously, we only have the small tidbit of him at Jackson State, and he had a big year in year 2, but I think there's a lot more. We know what Matt Rule is. We're still trying to figure out if Deion Sanders and his new offensive coordinator, his new defensive coordinator, offensive line, defensive line, if they're all going to work together and sort of either build off of the little success they had last year, or if it's going to be like a relearning process. But I do want to point out, Nebraska opens with UTEP, which I'm not trying to poo-poo on UTEP, but they're not the best team in the country.
They just hired a new coach because the previous coach wasn't doing very well, so that'll be a Nebraska win.
Right. And Colorado opens with North Dakota State. So if Colorado beats North Dakota State, which that's a big if, because obviously that's not.
They're gonna beat North Dakota State.
They should. But it's gonna be a tough game, right?
True.
I think Colorado will kind of be, I don't want to say in mid-season form, but they're kind of more battle tested at that point. Obviously it's week 2, but I do think that's something to look out for.
I think that's a valid point, that arguably, though they're at the FCS level, North Dakota State is a tougher opponent than a rebuilding UTEP program over in Conference USA. I mean, if you put North Dakota State in Conference USA right now, they are probably a conference title contender. Like, they are an FBS team masquerading at the FCS level. They have been for a long time. That same principle sort of applies now to South Dakota State too, who plays Oklahoma State in the non-conference this year across the Big 12. So you mentioned the year 2 factor. I want to turn that over to Shador Sanders, because one reason that line 6.5 intrigued me is Dylan Raiola might be good this year. The Big Ten does not have an elite lineup of quarterbacks. He could end the year and we look up and say, yeah, he's one of the 4 best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. That's entirely possible. It is within reason. It's not some bold prediction or anything of the sort. But we know that Shedeur Sanders is really good. And we don't yet know how Raiola is going to look when Travis Hunter is in the secondary compared to the high school kids he was going up against. So how much does that play into this, the quarterback matchup, and how much Shedeur outplays Raiola in this game in terms of who wins?
Yeah, I think the quarterback matchup's really interesting. I like that you brought up Travis Hunter because he specifically is like the king of baiting quarterbacks into bad throws. Like that's his bread and butter. It happened against TCU. It happened against, oh my gosh, it happened against so many teams. All of his interceptions.
He almost had a pick against UCLA that I think barely hit the ground, but He did the same thing to Ethan Garbers.
Yeah, he is the king of, I'm going to leave this guy. I'm going to give him some space over here, and then I'm going to crash. I think he did against Arizona where he was covering 2 guys at once. Obviously, it was a zone, but he was able to sort of maneuver his way, cover one guy, and then make his way over and prevent a touchdown. So Travis Hunter is probably going to try to play some mind games with Dylan Raiola. I'll be quite honest. The only full game of Dylan Raiola I've seen was the Polynesian Bowl, and that's a tough way to grade him because obviously he's playing with kids he met a week before. But I do think there's a growing aspect to it. Now, Nebraska, I think, did the smart thing and kind of established that he was the number 1 quarterback right away. So there was no like, okay, you got to earn it. Like, you got to earn those reps. You're going to be competing with whoever this guy is over here. Like, no, they kind of were like, okay, you got this. Like, let's figure it out. And so the quarterback battle is interesting to me because I think Shedeur Sanders last season, all things considered, and you could disagree or agree with this, I think he played well. Would you agree?
Oh, I completely agree. He threw for over 3,000 yards and was getting just blasted on every other snap.
Right. And so he played really, I just don't want to come off as I'm home cooking, but he played really well.
That's what I'm here for. I am the neutral arbiter of all things college football related, and everybody in the comments agrees.
Right, exactly. Except when it's about their team, and they're like, "This guy hates us." But no, he had probably the worst offensive line, maybe in Power 5 recent years. He was sacked 52 times last year. In his previous 2 years at Jackson State, which I think this is like Shedeur's biggest weakness is taking sacks. He was sacked 58 times in 2 years, and then 52 times last year. So he threw for 3,200 yards with a terrible offensive line. He threw for 3,200 yards and 27 touchdowns with 3 picks. In an offense that is only predicated on receivers making the decisions on what they're doing. Now, it is more predicated on what he wants. So he has a better offensive line. He has more control of the offense. And he just has another year of experience at the Power 5 level. And so I think that kind of, if you asked me if it came down to the quarterbacks, who would I trust more? I'd have to go Shedeur 10 days.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah, he's probably going to be the first overall pick or top 5 pick at worst. Like, you have to trust him more than Dylan Raiola. It's not an indictment on Dylan Raiola. It's just he'll have one game under his belt at that point. It's going to be against like you said, a bad UTEP team, and we're just not going to know enough about him. And even though it's a home game for Nebraska, that's still a lot of pressure to have 96,000 fans being like, okay, this guy is going to be the next great one. Like, we threw all this money at this guy. We flipped him from Georgia. Like, that's a lot of pressure. Is he ready for that? We don't know yet.
Real quick, before I get you out of here, how confident do you feel Colorado wins this game week 2?
On like a scale of 1 to 10?
Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being this is an absolute lock.
I would go about a 7. I think realistically, it's going to get personal as it did last year.
Call it the Monica Greller number.
Right. It's going to – whoo. Wow. She loved that 7. We got Monica Geller, Friends, love the 7.
Friends, just an all-time classic. The references are always welcome on this show.
The secret of the female, what is that 7? We'll never know. But realistically, you look at what happened last year, it kind of got personal. There was that weird encounter at midfield. Matt Rule said some things about Deion Sanders and his transfer portal usage. I think Matt Rule's taking a different approach this year. He's talked about Shedeur being the best quarterback or one of the best quarterbacks he's faced. He's talked about Coach Prime and how he admires him and stuff. So I think he's trying to not give them fuel. But I think Colorado only needs like one tweet, one video for it to be like, this is personal again. And so I think you factor in inexperienced quarterback, a much better Colorado team, and Colorado I just think is going to be a bowl contending team this year. And so I think this is one of the games where they can win.
Kevin Borba, Locked On Bus. Appreciate it as always, Kevin.
Thank you.
Speaking of betting odds, Notre Dame has shifted to being a favorite to make the playoff. Should they be? We're going to talk about that next. Notre Dame favored to make the playoff at minus 170. No conference championship required, right? That's Tyler Wojciak joining me here, Locked On Notre Dame. So, Tyler, do you agree that it should be a situation where you have to bet more than a 1-to-1 amount in order to make a unit, just for Notre Dame to make the playoff?
Well, I would say that certainly expectation around Notre Dame right now is they fully expect to make the playoff this season. I think anything less would be a disappointment. Honestly, anything less than a win in the first round, I think, of the college football playoff would be a disappointment for a bunch of different reasons. This is Marcus Freeman's third year as the head coach of Notre Dame. Notre Dame coaches in the past, their third year has typically been a big indicator of success. They have three coaches who won national championship in the third season: Lou Holtz, Eric Parsegian, Dan Devine. Brian Kelly made it to a national championship his third season. That was probably the closest he got, despite the fact that that game was not very close. So it's just been a big indicator of success. And I think with Notre Dame, their team is loaded. They bring back a bunch of players from last year, a ton of production. Certainly there are questions, just like there are with every single team in the country at this point in the season, but their schedule is also very favorable. Oddly enough, despite the fact that Notre Dame is favored to win 10.5 games, they are projected to lose the season opener against Texas A&M. So I think the way that Vegas sees it, they're going to lose on the road against Texas A&M in the season opener, run the table, go 11-1, and then make the college football playoff. I don't think that they're going to lose in the season opener. I do think it's going to be close, but I think that 10.5 is right about where they should be. And if they go 11-1, they're going to make the college football playoff.
I think if Notre Dame beats Texas A&M, they are a near lock to make the playoff when you look at their schedule, because most of their toughest games, Tyler, are coming at home. I mean, you just go down, you see, oh, okay, Louisville, yeah, you got them at home. Okay, well, the Florida State, oh yeah, well that's going to be at home. And every other game, you kind of look at it and go, yeah, you got USC on the road the final week of the season, but those are the four games I feel like that are going to define Notre Dame's season. You've got two at home. You've got two of them on the road. And I just feel like if they can eclipse either Texas A&M or USC, feels like they're a lock to host a first-round playoff game, because Notre Dame can't be one of the teams with a top four bye in this 12-team playoff, because they don't have a conference championship to play for because they are Notre Dame. But that's probably okay if you're Notre Dame's athletic director and administration, because you're thinking, well, how much revenue do we bring in with a home football game, let alone a home playoff game? That has to be wildly appealing to the Irish, and the schedule works out really, really well for that to happen.
Yeah, I remember when they announced the format for the expanded playoff, and a bunch of Notre Dame fans were all upset that they didn't get a first-round bye. They basically disqualified themselves from that. I'm like, okay, let's take a step back for a second. First of all, Notre Dame's old athletic director, he just retired this past spring, Jack Swarbrick, was in the room when those decisions were made. So he was advocating for Notre Dame to – I shouldn't say advocating. He was perfectly okay relinquishing that first-round bye, because think of it this way. If Notre Dame goes undefeated this year, or actually if they go 11-1, they won't get that fifth seed. But let's say they go undefeated, they get that fifth spot. They would most likely play the group of five, like the best group of five, the highest ranked group of five team who gets that automatic bid at the 12th spot. That's their first round. So yes, they wouldn't have a bye, but what do you need to do in order to get a bye? You have to win a conference championship. So that's effectively the first round game, right? Would you rather play one of the best teams in your conference in a conference championship to earn that bye, or would you rather host a home playoff game against a group of five team in the 5-12 game in the scenario that Notre Dame would be in the top four, that would, where the top four teams would get a bye? Notre Dame isn't getting one in the sense that the other teams are, but they are still kind of getting a much better situation if they end up going undefeated. So
hold on. A little bit, I think it can be a better situation, but that's assuming Notre Dame would be the 5 seed and play the group of 5 highest ranked conference champion that is in, whether that's Boise State, Memphis, Tulane, Fresno, Liberty, James Madison, plenty of contenders for that particular spot. But Notre Dame, I think, would have to be 11-1 to ensure that, because it would seem like 10-2 gives you a chance, but a 10-2 team being the 5th seed in the 12-team playoff,
yeah, that wouldn't happen.
I doubt that that's happening.
Honestly, if Notre Dame goes 11-1, they're probably not the 5th seed. because the schedule is just not good enough, at least as it stands right now. It's funny. Like we always talk about what a schedule is or what it's not going to be in July. And then more often than not, it ends up not being what we thought it'd be. But if you look at Notre Dame's schedule right now,
don't tell people that they might turn us off.
I think if you look at the toughest games in the schedule right now, Florida State stands out. But as you mentioned, they play them at home in November. I don't imagine there's a ton of players on Florida State who want to go all the way up to South Bend and play a frigid, cold game in early November. As a matter of fact, Notre Dame played Florida State in the snow a few years ago at home in November. And these were like the real down years for Florida State. It was really cold, and Notre Dame's players all came out like with their shirts off, and Florida State players came out with like 18 different layers on. They looked like Ralphie from A Christmas Story. They did not want to be there that day. I would imagine that in the Mike Norvell era, where this team is actually competitive, they'd have a different mindset about that game. But that is the toughest one. If they were to win every game except that one, they would make the playoff. They would not be the 5th seed. They'd probably be somewhere around 8 or 9. If they go 10-2, honestly, with the schedules, like say they lose their 2 toughest games, lose at Texas A&M, at Florida State, I don't think it's
hosting Florida State.
Yeah, hosting Florida State at Texas A&M. I don't think it's a lock that they make the playoff. I think that they would, but it'd be close, because if you lose those 2 games, what is their biggest win? You mentioned Louisville. I don't know if that's like a huge win. USC is a bit of a wild card. We have no idea what to expect from them this season, or at least I don't. Maybe you have a better idea. I shouldn't put words in your mouth. I mean, I don't really see another big win other than the 2 I mentioned.
Yeah, I think it can definitely depend on what other teams do. Now, I'm higher on USC than most. They have a brutally tough schedule. I mean, they wanted to get out of their opening game in 2024 in Vegas against LSU because the rest of their schedule is sufficiently tough. They've got Notre Dame on it. They have to play a Big Ten schedule now. I think for Notre Dame, they have to hope that either USC or Texas A&M put up at least 9 wins. And they could be hoping that in the context of getting the 5th seed to play the Group of 5 champion, or they could be hoping that to boost their strength of schedule to get into the playoff at all. Because I agree, if you look at this schedule and you say it's 10-2, like let's say the losses are FSU and USC, and you have wins over Louisville and Texas A&M. What if Texas A&M goes 8-4, and what if Louisville goes 9-3? Is that enough? Are those going to be significantly high-profile wins where the committee goes, yeah, 10-win Notre Dame is going to be in the playoff? Because to me, with the schedule, it feels more, because it is very ACC heavy, it feels like an ACC or a Big 12 10-2 rather than a Big 10 or an SEC 10-2, whereas in those conferences, I think if you win 10 regular season games, you are a lock for the playoff.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I think Notre Dame has to go 11-1 or undefeated to feel really good about their place in the college football playoff. I mean, like I said, they could still make it. It would depend. Like if they dropped the game to Louisville, but then they beat Florida State at the end of the year. Like timing does play a part in all of this. They play Louisville and Texas A&M in the first month of the season. They play Florida State and USC in November. So if they have a slow start, but then they beat, let's say, a top 10 ranked Florida State team and then close the season with a big win on the road against USC, they'd have some momentum. They'd probably make the college football playoff. But I think, that all plays a part into it. And the fact that they don't have a conference championship does complicate things. I do think that it's a little bit overblown in terms of like, oh, they're not a serious team because they're not in a conference championship. As I just broke it down, it's like they do have to play that one extra game. It just, if all things go to plan, they should be the 5 seed. I feel pretty good about this team going 11-1. I'm not ready to say that they're going to go undefeated, because just going undefeated is really hard, man. It's really, really hard. You're going to have a game. Like there's going to be one team on the schedule, other than the teams that we've already mentioned. Northern Illinois, they should smoke, but Purdue could be tough. Miami of Ohio is a decent MAC team. Stanford, Georgia Tech, Navy.
Sorry,
Virginia.
I was coughing.
Yeah. Again, like we laugh now, but every year there's always one game where this goes for pretty much every team, unless you're like Georgia at the peak of their powers, where like you did not prepare like you should have in the week leading up to the game.
Or something is just off with your team. You have a weird road trip. A meal goes awry.
Yeah.
Guys don't sleep. It does happen. Even Georgia, when they were winning back-to-back national championships, they were in a dogfight, I think, against Missouri. Kentucky pushed them. Like, nothing is ever easy. So I like your point about going undefeated there. But Notre Dame's win total is 10.5. So Vegas clearly feels really good about their ability to navigate the schedule. The playoff path is there. They just have to they just have to do what? What's your one biggest key to Notre Dame making the playoff?
I don't really have any concerns about the defense. They were top 5 defense in the country last year. They bring back a lot of their key players, including Xavier Watts, who won the Bronco Nagurski Award. So I feel good about that. I would say the biggest question I have about the team is the offensive line, which is definitely not something that we're used to as Notre Dame fans, because when you think of Notre Dame football, you think of like a great offensive line, all the different guys that they produce at the NFL, Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, the list goes on and on. That has been the staple of the program for the past few decades, really. And now all of a sudden this year with Joe Alt being drafted in the top 5, Blake Fisher leaving after his junior year, he got drafted pretty high as well. So they have to replace 2 starting tackles, and that is a big question mark. Even though they recruit really well on the offensive line, I think their timeline got a little jacked up because typically offensive linemen, especially at Notre Dame, don't leave after the 3rd year. And then this past offseason, they had 2 guys leave after the 3rd year. So they have talented guys playing the offensive line, but they are not very experienced. But if the line is just like above average, they'll be fine. They should make the playoff with these. But if their line really struggles, and it did back in 2021, the last time that they had to replace 2 tackles, they were bad at the start of the season, and it was a big reason why they lost to Cincinnati in 2021. It was their only loss of the season. That year, Cincinnati went on to make the college football playoff because they just had no time back there. If that line played better in that game, I think the course of college football could be a little bit different. I don't think Cincinnati makes the playoff because I think Notre Dame wins that game. And then Notre Dame goes undefeated that year. And who knows if Brian Kelly ends up at LSU. So I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there. But, like, it's kind of crazy how it all kind of boiled down to the offensive line. I think it's going to happen again this season.
It's the Always Sunny meme. Guy on the board. If this move hadn't gone just like that, then would have been okay. Great stuff. Tyler Wojciak, Locked On Notre Dame. Appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, man. Happy to do it.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.